Yeah, so I've just put the games up in chronological order, the same as which you sent them.
Yeah.
And this is our first position that you sent where
Yeah.
at this moment you went F5.
Yeah.
Um,
So I think this one, kind of for context a bit, I think so. This was the more recent one where I think I just remember that at this point, I think I suddenly had this because I'd kind of messaged you about it and I was kind of or maybe before that, but I was kind of
hmm.
consciously aware of these other games where actually this issue had happened. And I was like, right, don't let that happen. Right. I'm going to start pushing mine first.
Right, push yours first before they can push theirs so that, if you do end up having this race, then you're a bit
Yeah.
ahead. Yeah. Um, I can definitely understand that logic, and probably it's not completely wrong, but I would say that it comes secondary compared to the other aspects in this position. And I feel like there's not even a need to enter a race because these pawns are actually just so weak.
Yeah. And I could have just taken, like, I could just take
Yeah,
the A pawn here.
yeah, and I mean, it does look like, your rook is doing a very good job basically limiting this pawn, keeping this rook
Yeah.
backwards. But if you win a pawn, well, you're pawn up, which is always useful in an endgame. And after c4, you can still keep your rook active. Where would be the ideal square to put your rook?
Um, A4 stands out. But but then that's sort of very much limited on that
Hmm.
one square. Um, I could go E3
Okay, yeah. And as a general
um,
rule, so
or
rook
A2.
e3 is
Yeah.
good. And what was the last one?
A2 just in terms of like keep limiting the king to the
I
background.
see, I see. So all of these are decent. I would say that rook a4 as an instinct, you should be a bit careful. First of all, as you said, yeah, the rook is limited on the edge of a board, but also um, generally when we try and chase down pawns, it's better to put the rook behind.
Yeah,
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 because if you imagine on rook a4, they can support the pawn, and it's
yeah.
also
I
easy
can't really
to
go anywhere.
to
Yeah,
win it. But when you're behind the pawn, even if the pawn tries to run, then
I can just
uh,
take it anyway.
yeah, the rook is still controlling the square where it runs to. So yeah, I would say in this position, black is just clearly better because black's gonna win a second pawn, and this pawn is still weak, and we actually haven't made any weaknesses with our
Yeah.
pawns. Like they're still very strong. So I'd say f5 is a step in the wrong direction. Um, and then when you recaptured, Engine says both moves are exactly the same,
Yeah, I
but
thought so. I obviously looked at this game afterwards, and these were the first point where it was like I should have taken with the rook, but then I was worried about the pawns instead. But I
hmm,
think this is one where when I looked at it afterwards, the thing that jumped out to me here before using the engine was if I take with the G pawn, then I've now got the kind of two connected pass pawns.
yeah, I mean only one of them is passed, but
Yeah,
yeah,
but
it's
I've
going
got
to be
that. But
connected.
then,
Yeah,
yeah, then when I looked, the engine said they were like about equal. But I did think that, yeah, taking this way probably would have been better. I
yeah,
think I was more worried again about I was trying to keep that chain of three rather than splitting my pawns up into like three separate islands. But actually,
right.
I think this is much more dangerous for them in that I can then
Yeah, and I
advance
feel
into
like with structure, it's always, you got to look at the pros and cons of the structure. And you're right that in general, avoiding pawn islands. So, right, this is two pawn islands versus a
Mm.
single pawn island. It's better to avoid, but at the same time, giving yourself a passed pawn is probably a bigger factor, I
Mm.
would say. So G takes would definitely be the instinct, and basically you want this pawn to lead the two pawns going forward. And
Mhm.
I mean, what the pass pawn is great is not just about like promoting the pawn because that might be quite difficult, but it very often limits white's pieces. Like because white needs to keep
Yeah.
tabs on the pawn, you can go do other stuff and cause problems.
I think that's the thing, like saying about this general issue. I think that's the
Mm.
thing I've found in other games where it's like because I've let their pawns get really advanced, I then end up
Yeah,
having to kind of babysit that pawn for like ages, and it's
yeah.
like like everything ends up being tied down, just making sure that pawn on the sixth or seventh rank can't.
Right, and that's the ideal scenario for pushing those pawns, that you are tying your opponent down and they stay threatening as opposed to weak. But I think, yeah, in this case, I think that these will stay threatening because it's very difficult to undermine them when they're coming forward. You'll see in some examples of some of the other games, I feel like the advanced pawns are actually not threatening at all. But these, I can imagine they can be. Um, yeah, that's my feeling about this. Um, but yeah, okay, you took with the e-pawn. And still, I say you have an advantage because when I look at this 3v2, I feel like your free is healthier than this. And
Yeah,
your rook is also more active, right? The rook is
yeah,
your opponent's rook is passive defending, your rook is active and pressuring. So your opponent plays a nice move here to avoid this pawn being as weak. And rook c4, I feel like is um, maybe what I'll call a pseudo active rook move because it looks nice. It looks like
yeah.
you're
And then one
attacking.
move later, I was like, that was pointless. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And when we compare this position from a couple moves ago, I think we can definitely see how White's structure has improved because
yeah,
even though this is backwards and being attacked, at least it's backwards on a more useful square. Whereas a
yeah.
second ago, this pawn was really just a target and not helping at all.
Mm.
So yeah, at this moment, B6 I can understand. At first I was feeling it might be quite of an unnecessary move, but I understand that, if you try and activate your king now, White might be able to do this.
Could I so if you go back a minute, could I have
Yeah,
just pushed the A pawn?
here.
Yeah, as in
Possibly. And
if they because
probably
if
that's
they
good.
take
Yeah.
I take their A pawn. If
Yeah,
they
actually no, A5 is a great move. I love it. Um yeah, they take when you take, and I think their pawns are split. Maybe the only
I was probably worried
problem.
that there's only my B pawn stopping that advancing, and their rook can attack it. And
Yes, that's what I was
yeah,
about to say. Like, if you get this position, they can play rook b1 and try and get active themselves. So
yeah,
maybe this is the one drawback. But as a general idea to try and break up these pawns, I like it a lot. But yeah, what you really want to avoid is you want to avoid your opponents getting structures like this,
yeah,
where your pawn is actually clamped down. I mean, in general, in these endgames, you want to have moves with your pawn because if you ever get into a pawn endgame, having some extra tempo with your pawns are always quite handy. But this isn't really a case of extra tempo. This is a case of if you push this, they're going to take it and you're going to lose.
yeah.
So you don't really want to allow your pawns to get fixed, especially when they can move, but as soon as they move, it's going to be bad. Like this is a
Yeah,
really, really dangerous situation
yeah,
to allow your pawns to get into. So, but still, my instinct was King F7, and I feel like when you play these rook endgames, there's a very simple order of magnitude in terms of which pieces you choose to move. And I'd say that it starts with the rook,
yeah.
and then the king, and then the pawns. And if you follow this order in general terms, okay, sometimes concretely, specifically, you'll have to change the order. But in general terms, if you prioritize the rook, then prioritize the king, then prioritize the pawns, that generally works best in most cases.
Okay. Yeah, I think I was almost going for that like pattern recognition thing of like trying to tie down the defense on the other side and go, right, once I play B6, I know that then basically they can't advance
Hmm.
on that side. So I've kind of right, I've sorted that side out. Now I can go and keep my king. I think I was worried
Yeah.
that I
Yeah.
wanted my king to support my pawns advancing on one side. And I
Yeah.
didn't want the king to kind of have to go over and be defending on the other side. So I was like trying to kind of tie down the defense on the other side first. But
Yeah, and I think that's actually a fair point. And that's why B6 I don't mind. But after King F2, I do mind this. So what do you think should be the priority before playing F4?
king,
Yeah, King F7 first. because you never know if you start pushing these pawns too soon, they might become undermined, and this is when you would like be wishing that you had your king on f5
Yeah.
or somewhere closer. So yeah, this rule of the rooks, then the kings, then the pawns. This generally is a good idea. And one yeah little example I created here was just to show how strong these pawns really are when they push forward, and maybe how not strong they might be. So for instance, I just thought, okay, what if white were to just play king e2 and king f2? Like, obviously, they would never do this.
Yeah.
But let's imagine the pawns get all the way up to here. Now, if, white is completely naive and just keeps shuffling back and forth, um, white will win this. They'll bring in their king, and
Mm.
it'll reach a point where basically these pawns are extremely strong. I mean, you have a majority, they're far advanced, and you will make progress because this pawn will then become passed. It's going to be very high up. It's going to, yeah, give you winning chances. So yeah, I put sure this is winning. However, if we go back, even at this moment where you've allowed the pawns to get this far, if these pawns are not supported well, then they're probably just weak. And in this position, after a move like King D3, and the rook has to retreat,
Mm.
pawns can be attacked. And actually, this is a phenomenon with the pawns that yeah, the further up the board they go, the closer they are to your territory, and the more chance there is of those pawns simply dropping. And I think a prime example of this was a classical game of mine a couple of years ago against a player around the same rating as me, around 2000. Yeah, let me just hide next moves on this. Yeah, so this was the position we reached in our game. My opponent played the move rook d6 and offered me a draw. And I think to most people, this looks like the most drawish of drawn positions that they've ever come across.
Mm.
Right? It's just same structure, both sides have a rook, nothing is happening. But I noticed in this position, maybe my king is slightly more active than black's. And also, black's pawns are slightly more advanced than mine. And I'm coming from the camp that these slightly more advanced pawns are slightly weaker, and weaknesses can be exploited. So I played the move king f3, and to my delight, my opponent played b5. And as I said just now, the further these pawns come down the board, the more likely they are that they're going to get targeted. And remember, this difference of these pawns being here compared to here.
Yeah.
So I played king e4. And again, this move, I mean, I kind of understand, like my opponent wanted to activate his king this way. But again, I'm getting moves in with the king, while my opponent's having to make moves with the pawn. So this is positionally good for me. And I activate my king even more. Now, my opponent, I think, is worried about my king either entering on the sick rank or maybe trying to get a rook to the sick rank. So he actually plays the move rook b6 here to try and keep my king cut off. But I don't like this move at all because we see that the rook's potential is limited, right? It's kind of
Mm.
stuck. It's only really effective on this
Yeah.
one horizontal. So here, I then activate my rook, and I calculate
Mm.
carefully that, if I can get the move rook f6 in and they weren't
Yeah.
afraid, I would be winning this pawn endgame because what's the decisive factor?
The king activity.
Yeah, the king activity. And often, you need like a couple advantages to win. But when you have such an overwhelming advantage of just a
Mm.
single advantage, then that's also enough. Like, yeah, I'm just going to be much faster at winning these pawns and pushing these pawns. So my opponent in this position already is down to an only move and should probably play the move rook c6, just so that if I
Yeah.
try and get active, at least black can get active too.
Yeah.
If you keep this in mind that rook activity is the most important thing in rook endgames, then this enables you to find such moves a lot easier. But yeah, black played b4. I gave a check. And yeah, black cannot activate their king because I'm going to check trade rooks. And again, I will have a winning pawn endgame, which, I can't just say intuitively, and I should never just say intuitively. But at the time of the game, I did calculate that move by move, I am winning this pawn endgame. So my opponent played king c6. Now his king is even weaker. Now I put the rook on f6. And yeah, he doesn't want to trade rooks, so he gave me a check. I come over this way. He tries to get his rook active now, which is a good idea. I win his pawn, he wins my pawn. I play b3. But what you can see is that when you compare our kings, firstly, my king is way more active than his. But also, if his pawns were back here,
Yeah.
I would have a much harder time of using my king to actually attack those pawns, and he would have a much easier time to defend them. But since the pawns have pushed forward and I'm actively trying to challenge them, yeah,
Mm.
I actually succeed in this. And what we see is that Black's rook is tied down by my king. Because if this rook ever tries to move and do something different, I'm going to win the pawn.
Yeah.
And while this rook is, protecting this pawn, I can go about with this rook. I can go gobble up all these pawns.
Mm.
So what ends up happening is my opponent tries to activate. I played a move rook h5. I choose rook h5 as opposed to g6 because the rook is still protecting.
Yeah.
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 Plays g4. I take and I go back. And basically, this guy is dropping, this guy is dropping, and it's all because he pushed his pawns. So yeah, like as you see in this example, if you allow those pawns to actually become supported and you do nothing about them, then sure, yeah, then there'll be a problem. But if you keep in mind that actually, yeah, you can deal with them if you act appropriately and try and challenge these pawns and actually claim that, okay, they're actually not a strength, they're actually a weakness. Yeah, then you can actually make them a weakness.
Mm.
Yeah, so I kind of stopped the analysis of this game here.
Okay.
Because I think, yeah, like this game kind of spiraled out of
Yeah.
control in terms of an objective standpoint. I mean, like, I think, yeah, you ended up getting these pawns to be strong in the end. But yeah, many, yeah, probably quite a few mistakes from both sides for
Yeah.
that to happen. But this is the general principle. So here's an example. Um, is this the game? Or maybe I can find an. Yeah, this is the one actually. So, uh, yeah, at this moment, Black's kind of getting their pawns advanced on the queen
Yeah.
side. You make this trade. Yeah, you find this interesting tactical idea to avoid dropping any material, and we've reached this position.
Mm.
Now, do you remember what you played in the game?
Um, um, so that my B pawn is under attack, which would then be attacking the rook. So I can't. Um, I could. Yeah. I'm looking. Obviously, the knights are looking at each other, and mine is defended. So I wouldn't mind that trade necessarily.
Mhm.
Yeah, I can't remember whether. So the thing jumping out is I've got to do something about the fact that B pawn is under attack from the bishop.
Mhm.
I can't move the B pawn because I'd drop the rook or the exchange. So then, yeah, I don't know whether I played something like rook B1 or whether I first did like knight takes B8, um, rook takes B8, but then that pawn's under even more pressure. So I doubt I'd have done
Mm.
that. I don't something like rook B1, but yeah, I can't remember what.
Okay, yeah. So I think Rugby 1 would be slightly better than what you played. You did in fact trade on B8 and
Okay.
allow even more pressure
Yeah.
on this B2 pawn. But one thing, or two things here, I would say, is what ended up happening is after losing this pawn, you then felt very uncomfortable about the strength of the C pawn, and the C pawn eventually came down the
Yeah.
board and did cause problems. And
Yeah. It's that same thing of like, I'm sure if you at some point I look at that and think, right, they're in terms of pawn structure, like what
yeah,
upper pawn, their pawns, like two of their pawns are isolated, one's completely in the middle of nowhere, like it's a weak structure. And then
yeah,
yeah, once it kind of gets advanced, suddenly that weakness, I start thinking like, actually, right now I'm in a lot of trouble.
yeah, and that weakness, I mean, has literally just came about here.
Yeah,
And this is exactly the moment where you should try and treat it. And I'd
yeah,
say that, you're very focused on like, how can we defend this pawn? How can we deal with it? But the great thing in chess is sometimes we don't have to defend it. We can defend
mm,
by counterattacking.
yeah.
So
Could I play like rook a c1 or
exactly. And that's the best move in the position.
yeah,
Because this pawn, yeah, if we let it live and we let it become a problem, then it will become a problem. But it turns out that when these pawns are far advanced, they're actually very weak. And as you can see, there's no good way to defend this pawn because it's all the way, past the middle of the board for them. We can attack it and we can win it. And yeah, this trade then is nothing to worry about. And yeah,
yeah,
maybe we've even got the slightly more active pieces and can claim a slight advantage.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, in this position, rook ac1 and white is completely fine. But after rook b8, what I've just written here is that rather than this pawn being strong, it's more of a case of the b2 pawn being so weak
yeah.
that it
Like
makes
it's under attack twice, but it can't actually advance either.
yeah.
Yeah,
But even here, I mean, I'm not checking with an engine just now, but I wonder if you can still play rook c1. Like maybe this time they can take with the rook so that they can win two pawns, and maybe that's a little bit uncomfortable. But even here, like it's easier to attack this pawn than to
I could
defend it.
play rook f c1, and then that threat of losing both.
True, but what's the
Oh, then yeah,
tactical
I
drawback?
need to get the rook on a1 out of the bishop's line of sight.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
this then has
yeah, yeah,
this problem. Yeah.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, just keep in mind that, these kind of positional factors that you know, like how these pawns are isolated,
yeah,
like just yeah, go one step further and be like,
yeah.
okay, I know they're weak, so let's exploit the
Yeah, I
weakness.
think we're in terms of like focusing on the wrong thing again, like here. I think I'm was probably looking at this going like in terms of where's my advantage, saying like on the queen side we've both got two pawns, but theirs are both isolated, mine are connected. And I think I was kind of almost like worried about just allowing them to basically trade off their weakness in
I
terms of
see.
like if I take their pawn, they take mine,
Yeah,
then I was kind of probably again focused on not allowing them to just trade off their weakness and even everything out, but not necessarily thinking about my own weakness. And that would also be trading off my kind of weak.
right. Now that's actually a very, very good point. And in an ideal world, if we could avoid that,
I don't think I viewed my B pawn as a weakness, which I
right.
should have been doing. And then I'd have probably thought, yeah, fine, trade off both weaknesses and
Yeah, and
get my
that's the
rook
thing.
out
I
the
feel like this
corner.
pawn, it is weak because, as you said, it can't move forward.
Mm,
And if this pawn goes, this pawn becomes very strong. So yeah, this pawn is actually starting to become a bit dangerous. That's
mm.
my feeling. But you're right. Maybe if we can actually have time to play rook b1 and then maybe challenge this pawn with rook fc1, maybe we can actually be a bit greedy and have it all. But it's also risky when you play this way because if you do end up losing this b pawn, then the c pawn will become strong.
Yeah,
So that's where like you'd really need to calculate very carefully to make sure that is the case. Uh, that you will keep the B pawn and you will win the C pawn, as opposed to eventually losing the B pawn, they keep their C pawn and we're in
yeah,
trouble. So yeah, it is a matter of time. Like remember this game one, how I said, even when these pawns get all the way here, if you then act appropriately with this king d3, then yeah, you're still in time. But if you leave it a bit too long, well then you're not gonna have time, and
Yeah.
black's winning. So yeah, when those pawns are advanced, they are somewhat weak, but they can also suddenly become strong. So yeah, fine line between weakness and strength.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, this next game, I won't comment on the final position because I think this
Yeah.
one is still being
Yeah.
played. But yeah, I just wanted to comment that in the opening, like you got this classical variation, which yeah, you played it perfectly. I mean, you meet this knight f3 with knight d7 to stop knight e5 business, and you made this trade, which is fine. And as we see, the opponent did not play for this h4 h5, so we don't have an additional weakness to target. Um, oh, and one important thing I almost forgot there is when you meet queen b3 with queen b6 to cover this pawn, if they ever take your queen on b6, I love taking with the a pawn
Yeah.
because we activate this rook on the a file, and I don't think that this pawn structure is actually weak. Like I've
Mhm.
played it a lot, and we end up putting the pawn on b5. The pawns are very, very solid, and it just gives a little bit more play. I mean, the knight generally has some nice squares to hop to. The open a file is yeah is very
Yeah,
nice.
I think that's what I'd normally do. But when kind of there's an opening you're familiar with, but the move order is slightly different. So yeah,
Aha,
I think norm in terms of that queen coming out, I'd normally meet it with like queen b6, like I did, and then if they take, I'll take with the a pawn because you basically got to. But I think when it happened, I then learned because I'd already brought the knight out
right.
for the other reason. I suddenly thought, oh, I can take with the knight and keep the pawn structure. But I guess the other thing is the moment I take with the knight, I'm almost forgetting like why is my knight there in the first place
True.
as
Yeah,
well,
you
which I've put the
yeah.
knight there for a specific reason. And then once I take with the knight, technically that allows them to go like knight e5, which was the whole thing I was trying to stop.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, I wasn't even thinking about that, but yeah, that's a really useful point as well. So yeah, I would always take with this
Yeah.
a pawn. I've got a couple games actually I could show where this a pawn is strong, but um, yeah, for now let's keep going. So we get this structure where it's pretty. I mean, a lot of people would consider it dry, and okay, I'll just get to the main
Yeah.
position, which is here. Where um yeah, this is a very, 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 very typical structure that you can get in this classical Caro-Kann. And I would say that we need to feel confident about it. And the good news is that I believe our pawn structure is actually stronger than white's from a strategical perspective. And we actually have uh, a rule that was invented by Keith Arkle called Arkle's hierarchy of pawns to back this up. So what Arkle says is that when both sides are castled on the king side, there is a general strength of the pawns. And the way that the rule works is that he says a C pawn is stronger than a B pawn, a D pawn is stronger than a C pawn, an E pawn is stronger than a D pawn, and an F pawn is stronger than an E pawn. And it seems quite counterintuitive because the general rule we learn is that, the pawns are stronger the closer they are to the center and weaker when they're further to the edge. At least in like the middle game or the opening. But yeah, he's even saying that the F pawn is stronger than the E pawn. So, and the reason why is that is because Arkle has analyzed a lot of structures, and come to this conclusion. And a great example of why the F pawn can be stronger. There's a very typical position that can be reached in the Dutch opening. So let's say something like this, like a classical Dutch, where if allowed, um, and white gets in this e4 break. Let me put the queen here. And let's say white plays e4. There's a general rule in the Dutch. You always meet e4 with e5, or if you can't, then you meet e4 with f4. But in any case, let's say black doesn't do this and just plays a very uh oh no, sorry, they don't play a move like this. They take on e4. That well then when we get this kind of position, okay, uh yeah, here we see that the f pawn has been traded for the e pawn. And structurally, this is actually better for white because this pawn is generally weaker. And if we ever get into an endgame, white's king will be castled on this side, and white will have a 3 versus 2. And with the king on this side, if let's say all of the pieces magically disappeared,
Mm.
this is a better situation for white because when white advances their majority, the king is going to be on this side of the board to support the majority. So
Yeah.
it's a very, very long-term feeling, and in most cases, it's probably irrelevant. But still, from a structural inherent strength of the pawn point of view, we can then draw the conclusion that the f pawn is stronger than the e pawn when both sides
Yeah.
are castled kingside. Of course, this
Yeah.
makes a difference when both sides are castled queenside. And what Arkle says is that if we imagine that, let's say, the kings are on
Yeah.
b8 and b1, well, then you have to look at the pawns in the opposite way. We
Yeah.
say that the f pawn is stronger than the g pawn, the e pawn is stronger than the f pawn, the d pawn is stronger than the e pawn, and the c pawn is stronger than the d pawn. Like the same pattern flips
Yeah.
to the other side. So what we can see when we look at this structure that we have in front of us is that the difference is that white has a d pawn and black has an e pawn. But which pawn is stronger in the Arkle hierarchy of pawns?
E.
The e pawn.
Mm.
Yeah. So even if it feels a bit uncomfortable, you got to back yourself and say, okay, actually, I've got the better pawn structure here
Yeah.
because I've got the e pawn and they've got the d pawn. Now, definitely, I can understand how it feels a bit uncomfortable that, white is gaining all this space. But you've also got to remember that, yeah, the further these pawns push forward, the more vulnerable they are. And also, generally, we should also understand what is the advantage of having space. Well, having space often means that they can maneuver their pieces more easily, making use of that space. But here we have an example where lots of the pieces have been traded.
Mm.
So I feel less, concerned about the fact that they have the space because I don't even see how they make use of it. Now, of course, if you allow these pawns to push and you do absolutely nothing about it, then yeah, these pawns will become a strength. But if we keep in mind that, yeah, these pawns can be targeted, they can be weak, then we can play against that. So in this position, I quite like the move rook d6 in this specific position because what is the idea behind rook d6?
Um, Following up with rook d8.
Yeah, just to put pressure on this weak pawn that's been pushed too far forward. And I just had a quick look at
Is there
all
a
of the
reason
different.
you'd play d6 and not d7?
Mhm. Yeah, there is. Well, what is the reason?
Uh, oh, it can't be attacked by the knight.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the only specific reason.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I would much prefer rook on d7 where I've
Yeah.
got a few more options. It feels a bit
Yeah. Yeah.
stucky. But yeah, just I thought even with rook d6, I just had a quick look at white's option. So let's say white attacks the rook with c5. Well, then this makes this pawn backwards, and we can play rook d5, and then
Yeah.
we can double. And I think this looks very pleasant. Like white's gonna have to be concerned about this. If white were to play f5, well, then we can take it. Our knight is protecting our rook.
Yeah.
They can take back, and then we actually
What
have a
if?
slightly better position
Oh no. So
because
yeah.
these
I was
pawns
going to
are.
say So if you go back one move,
Yeah.
so go, yeah, just before that pawn capture. I was so yeah out there. I was going to say, what if they push the G pawn to kick the knight out of the defense of the rook? Obviously,
But
I
where
guess
would
if they do that, you've got a rook takes rook first,
you could do rook
but
takes
then
rook
you've handed
first, but
over the
even
opening
if
file.
not, what's another way we can deal with this?
Um, I don't know. Like if you can, basically, I'm thinking you can't just move the knight because it can't. Oh, you could. Yeah, you could block the file. Like
Exactly.
knight e4. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Sticky square, knight to
Yeah.
secure. But it's great
Yeah.
that you're considering this stuff because yeah, I like yeah, the more you consider
Yeah.
these
I think that's just my worry when it's
resources,
like when
yeah.
I'm aware that say, oh, like as soon as you said, yeah, that's fine because the knight's defending the rook. I think the
Mm.
immediate thing would be right. Look, is there a way they can then
Yeah,
get the
that
knight
as
out
a
of that
thought
defense?
process is brilliant and hang on to that because that's something actually it's taken me many, many, many years to kind of have that. And even so, I'm not even consistent with it. So if you've got that, keep it. It's very useful. Yeah. So yeah. Luckily then F5 is working out concretely as well. And let's say if the opponent plays G5 first and then F5, now that yeah, now that the knight is not on F6, so that the rook is hanging. These pawns are still vulnerable. We could play knight g3.
Mm.
And if they were to take, well, then we're very happy we can take back. And actually, these pawns, I think, are more of a weakness than a strength.
Yeah.
And on f6, apparently, Engine was even just saying knight f5, and we're doing fine. Because even though white can split up our pawns, I don't think it's a big deal. I think we can just take back. These pawns are going to be potentially weak. We can still pressure on the d file. And there's no way that white can get to this weakness. So even though we've created a pawn island and we've created an isolated pawn, if there's no way to target the weakness, then is it really weak? And this is also a more high level thing that you'll come to at some point with pawn structure, which is pawn structure is always, always, always relative to the pieces and placements of these pieces on the board. So yeah, like all of these rules about, oh yeah, isolated pawn is weak, double pawns are weak. It's always relative to the actual pieces on the board. And we should always think in these terms when
Yeah.
deciding what's weak. But of course, having some general rules can never hurt. I mean, if you know that in general an isolated pawn or in general double pawns are weaker, that's still useful because then you can kind of start there and then consider if there are exceptions rather than just be, wildly just trying to decide what's good and what's not. But yeah, always relative to the pieces. So yeah, in this situation, I feel like there are ways to go. And another really, really nice pawn break, which is a bit of a secret of mine in this structure, is to play the move b5. Unfortunately, b5 doesn't work so well here because there is this knight e5 jump, which is quite annoying, which is why probably the knight on d7 should stay
Mm.
there to handle this jump. But if not for this, b5 is a really, really nice break in the structure because if white were to take, we take back, and what have we achieved?
We've isolated the D pawn,
Isolated the d pawn. We can blockade it,
which
and
is also under it. There's pressure on it as well already.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
maybe
like
we can play on the c
open
file,
the
or
C
we could
file.
double
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and pressure this pawn. So this is one way it could go. Another way it could go is white could push, but then this pawn is
Yeah.
backwards, and we can pressure this pawn. And finally, if they do nothing about it, then we can take and then eventually break c5 because yeah, let's say we have a knight on d7, right? Let's say this is the position and we break with c5. Okay, we always need to make sure that they can't play d5, which probably is then going to be good for them if they get this pawn for this pawn because this pawn is probably a little more dangerous. But if they can't push because we've dealt with this
Yeah.
push, and they need to take, or they allow us to take them. In both cases, again, they're left with an isolated pawn.
Yeah.
So just to show this, I mean, in Gütersloh in Germany, this summer, I played a classical game, and I reached this position, which looks quite similar to yeah, the pawn structure you had, where I've got this stronger e pawn versus the d pawn. I've got a couple more pieces on the board. But he plays bishop f5. I put my rook on the line of their queen. I develop my queen, and um, I end up putting my queen on a3, which is very handy because I then go for this b4 break. And it's exactly the same. If they take me, then I take back. This guy's isolated. If they push, then this square is weak, and this is backwards. If they play b6, then what I want to do is I want to take and then play for c4. So I played the move knight b3 here to add pressure onto this pawn, and I offered him a draw. And yeah, you'll find, at some point I'll share with you all these practical tips and tricks. But draw offers are like the one psychological play you can make use of in chess. It's the one verbal action you can use. And the draw offer unnerved him so much that he even made a mistake immediately. He just played rook c8, which is extremely careless because it allowed bishop a6, and now I even won a pawn. But okay, he played it very well from here, and turns out my pawn advantage actually wasn't enough to be giving me an advantage. But yeah, this plan to play b4 and break down the structure this way, and then push c4 is better, because if you try and push c4 immediately, like let's say, yeah, maybe here, if I try and push c4, the thing is that let's say they take and we get this structure, this 3v2, in general, is probably better for black in the long term. And the reason why is normally, if white is able to conduct a minority attack and use the two pawns to thrust forward to break up the three pawns, then it is better for white. And given that rooks are on the board, generally, these pawns are more of a weakness than a strength, like the majority.
Is
However,
that because is that just because like pushing the minority and breaking up that majority means you've then got open files or like
open
semi
files, and also the pawns are more
using
easy to
rooks?
target once they're broken down and
Yeah.
isolated. So the rooks can actually target those pawns. But the real risk of this 3v2 is if you were to trade all the heavy pieces and you get to a minor piece endgame or even a king and pawn endgame, then the 3v2 is stronger than the 4v3 on the king side.
Mm.
And uh, yeah, we need to watch out for a passed pawn being created, and then getting that classic case of if let's say we get this structure where, let's say, all these pawns and pieces disappear. Like if the maybe this is wishful thinking, but like if you get this kind of position, then you're lost as white. Because
Yeah.
if black can create that singular passed pawn and is on one side of a board, once white is going to deal with it, black will be able to come to the other side of the board and then have the more active king and win the pawn endgame this way,
So
like
would
this.
you said like the 3v2 would be
Yeah.
more dangerous than the 4v3. Like, would that be sort of a general rule, or is that only because the kings are on the side of the 4v3 and it's kind of the 3v2 on the other side? Or is it
I think it's a general rule. I mean, if anything, the kings being on the side of a 4v3 helps the side that's with the 4.
yeah, okay. Yeah.
Right? Because generally you want the king to help your majority. So probably this makes it even closer. But as a general rule, 1v0 is the best, then 2v1 is second best, 3v2 is third best, 4v3 is fifth best,
Yeah,
and
okay.
so on, fourth best. So yeah, it's more of a general rule. And yeah, the majority becomes more dangerous when the rooks come off the board. Once the rooks are still on the board, then you can kind of claim that if they try and push their majority, we're going to challenge that majority. A bit like in your game two,
Mm.
where like, you have this opportunity to attack these pawns, right? This used to be a majority, right? This
Yeah.
3v2. I guess okay, this is a 3v3, so maybe not quite the situation. But yeah, when these pawns come forward, you've still got rooks on the board, you
Yeah.
can target them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah. Uh yeah, so to go back to your game then, and discuss this position, the reason why you ended up getting a worse position from this position forwards is unfortunately c5
Yeah.
just blunders a pawn.
Yeah.
It's right. It's a potentially nice break to make, but yeah, the problem is you can't even win it back because they're just going to play b4.
Yeah. I think that was something I think I missed that I couldn't win it back.
Yeah,
And then, yeah, it's one of those things where you kind of think you're doing it, or you've got a certain line in mind that you think works. And then a couple of, like, one or two moves later, you suddenly realize that, yeah, the line you'd calculated doesn't actually work and you've just handed over a pawn.
yeah, and handing over a pawn in the end game is can be extremely costly, and probably this is one of those moments. So to be honest, this is the reason why the pawns became dangerous because we went down a pawn and the pawns kind
Yeah.
of gained in strength. But before that, I don't think these pawns are actually that scary. And we should just
Mm.
be mindful that we need to play actively and try and undermine them and weaken them and acknowledge that actually we have more chance of weakening them because they've been pushed forward.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah, I think on that, just I'm trying to look at like why did I even do that? I think I thought that if I then followed it up with like knight e4, so
Mm,
after I pushed the c pawn and they took,
yeah,
I thought, oh, if I go knight, or I maybe thought, right, trade the rooks and then knight
right.
e4, which targets that pawn back and they can't advance it or it could get taken. But
Yeah.
then yeah, I think that was the kind of line I was thinking.
Right.
I was kind of worried of, again, like that majority on that side, and thought, right, if I push that, I can kind of, yeah, do something, and then if I follow it up a move or two later with the knight, I can win it back. But then, yeah, I thought
Yeah, and it's
they could
good
have.
that you're considering these creative ideas to, imbalance the position or try and change the position in your favor. But the more tactical your resource is, the more careful you need to be that the
Yeah,
concrete follow-up is actually
yeah,
working out for you. Because, yeah, first of all, as you said, this move is probably just too
yeah. I'd need to
because they
trade
can
the
take
rooks
and then
first
take.
to clear that square, but
Exactly.
I
And the
think that
problem
was
is by trading rooks first, you
then
also
giving
allow
them the
their rook to
open
get active.
file. Yeah,
Yeah. So like probably, you'd need to calculate this. After rook d7, you take on c5,
yeah, which would then
rook
attack the rook,
c7,
but then they could
attacking the
take my
knight.
pawn, and yeah,
Black can maybe defend, but then either white can take on a7, or maybe they can push b4.
yeah,
So yeah, my feeling would be yeah, this isn't working. I don't think it does.
yeah,
Uh, And yeah, probably before you play c5, you should realize how big of a decision this is. Like if your
yeah,
uh, ideas aren't working out concretely, then you might just simply be worse. So maybe sometimes if your position is already really bad and you don't have much time on the clock, then you can kind of go for this and just kind of play a bit of hope chess that your
yeah.
intuition is working out.
Yeah, I think I don't. I think that was the line I was going for, but I think
Yeah,
I'm kind of making this up now. But I think it might have been that I was kind of overly worried, as we've said, about this kind of pawn.
yeah,
These pawns all coming towards me on like both sides of the board. It might have been that I was kind of overly worried about that. So then I was trying to find something creative to kind of deal with the issue when I didn't actually need to.
right, exactly. So again, I think it comes back to this mindset about these pawns. Yeah, not no need to be so afraid of them. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, have a little bit of fear that they might become strong one day if we're not careful, but they're also weak.
yeah,
Um, yeah, and what have I written here? Oh no, that's what you wrote.
yeah. This, to be fair, this one I think like I think I played the opening correctly, but it just meant that
Mm.
once that opening was done, the nature of kind of in Caracan setup and then them kind of pushing things down the king
Yeah,
side,
and it's
I
actually
just
very, very
ended
funny
up with it
because
like, yeah, it's almost I felt like I'd done nothing wrong, but then
yeah.
I had these pawns like staring at my king, and that kind of made me feel uncomfortable, I guess.
Right, right, right. Yeah. So I want to talk about this opening in particular because I actually got this exact opening in the British Rapid Play during the summer. And you did this exactly right. Like you met h4 of h5, and the instinct to play knight g8 is exactly what I played um, as well, because what I want to do with the knight is I want to recycle it to
Yeah.
f5. Yeah, and bishop d3 came. I took on d3, and instantly I just played the move g6. And from a strategical perspective, this is a better position for black
Mm.
because these pawns, even though they've advanced, they've achieved
Yeah.
absolutely nothing. The pawns are completely blocked off. And when you look at the base of the pawn chain, the f7 pawn is way easier to protect than the h4 pawn, right? I mean, this knight is literally going to target it very, very soon. But what I'd completely overlooked when playing this move is my opponent can play bishop e5, which is very annoying because, yeah, I don't want that bishop to be cutting into my position like this, and I don't want my rook to be
Yeah.
stuck on h7. I mean, probably it's not stuck long term. I can probably kick away this bishop and get it back out, but this is a lot of moves
Yeah.
and it's not ideal. So I actually made this exact mistake, like in my British Rapid play, and to my surprise, because I played G6 with so much confidence, because I was confident about it, my opponent actually missed Bishop E5. He just played a bit too quickly as well. But as soon as I played it, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, "Oh God, Bishop E5
Yeah.
is strong." So it turns out that actually, at this moment, it's better to put the knight on D7 so that when Bishop D3 comes and you trade, you can play G6 because there's no Bishop E5. And here, the game would continue. Probably I even put the bishop on E7, put the king on G7, and eventually break with C5, knight C6, and yeah, the game continues. I mean, okay, actually, to be honest, maybe I'm getting this confused. Like the bishop on E7 actually might not be as strong when it's just staring at these pawns. So maybe the bishop does belong on G7 and let's just castle. Maybe this is actually a lot better because yeah, actually it looks like the center is going to open up way more and this is going to stay closed. So yeah, probably that's the better development plan actually. Bishop G7 and castles
Yeah.
and just go for C5 and E5. Um, but yeah, so knight G8. Yeah, the issue here is that we cannot play G6. But if we could play G6, it would be better for us because we have a very solid structure and white's pawns are going to be weaker than ours. Um, but yeah, there was one moment here where, as well, I thought that when attacking the queen side, if we're going to have opposite sides castles, like I probably would play this G6 move, like sooner rather than later, just G6 and just castle the king. And I think that the king is very safe on this side of the board. But when we play opposite sides castles, um, you had the right idea with trying to push the pawns and try and attack their king. But when we push the pawns in a pawn storm, we need to think about which pawn to push that is actually going to open up this
Yeah.
side of the board. And a4 doesn't really cut it because
No.
a4 just gets blocked and we don't really achieve too much. So
Yeah.
what? Uh,
Well, so looking like their A pawn as a sort of hook is like B
yes,
shows the B pawn that needs to go first, and
there we go.
then
And
yeah,
that's it. B5. And if they play like in the game, B4, and now we open up that white king.
yeah,
Uh, yeah, probably I still want G6 and castles, and the reason why I'm so adamant on G6 is because if we just castle them, potentially they can sack the pawn. Just to try and open up this file if we take it. And if we don't take it and we push F6, I mean then E6 becomes weak.
yeah,
So Probably I just want to play g6 first and then castle and then try and open up this side of the board and
Yeah.
then
I
checkmate
think
them.
I think I was aware of that, as in like aware of, like do I stop? Do I kind of keep advancing on my side, or do I kind of try and stop what they're doing on their side
Hmm.
first and use a tempo to do that? But I think it was a combination of like not one of thinking, right, don't waste a tempo on something that might not be necessarily needed yet when I
Yes.
can keep putting the pressure on the other side. And then also the like um almost not wanting to kind of bring my pawns closer to theirs when I almost felt like, am I helping them out by like, if their bishop gets out of the way, like if I've gone g6 and
And then they push
then their f pawn
for
can
f4,
start
f5.
advancing, like by
True.
putting, well, I guess I've got my e pawn there, but like it was that kind of fear of firstly not missing out on a tempo, but also like in opposite sides castling, not wanting to help them out by bringing my pawns closer to them.
Yeah, and actually that's a very, very good positional consideration. So yeah, nice that you're thinking in this way. I just think that yeah, in this specific example, probably
Yeah, I
using the
can see how
pawn
that
prevents
G6
this.
then, yeah, it kind of removes. It's like we've got opposite side castling, but I've got a load of threats on one side and they've got nothing on the other.
Yeah, and I also think that pushing g6, you might be afraid that it weakens the dark squares and they have a dark square bishop and we don't. But at the same time, because the position is so congested on this side, I don't see a way that they can make use of the dark squares. Like it's only one bishop, and I
Yeah,
don't see how their queen is coming in.
yeah.
And if they try and come in, we can just cover the dark squares manually with our knights or with our queen.
Mm.
Should be okay. So probably this is the way I would go in this Jabava setup. But actually, the way you played the opening here, like I thought this was good. I mean, you got all these pieces out, you stopped your bishop getting trapped, and whenever I see g5, I'm very happy because I feel like yeah, they've closed up the king side, and that means I can castle on this side and be completely safe. So yeah,
Yeah, I think I've
but
viewed it the exact opposite. As in, I've gone, G5 and gone, right there. I wanted to castle on that side, and now everything's like
yeah,
close to
and
where I'm going to castle. And yeah,
I think if let's say, G5 comes and rather than have this setup, let's say we had this one. This I would be more worried about because white has a free bishop and they have a free attack. But when we compare this to the position you got in the game, I mean, the fact that this is already closed, it means that they don't have a way to open up the position. And this is why I'm talking about with thinking carefully about how you push the queenside pawns. This would be opening up the queenside.
I don't
This
know why.
kind of
I don't know why I played that. It's
just
like look,
keeping it closed. Yeah, and what
like
ends up
even looking
happening,
at it, it's like it's obvious. No matter how you look at it, you either go, "Oh, they've got the A pawn, so push the B pawn to kind of get to it," or you like think, "Well, I can't." It's not like I could even be worried about knight A4 because by pushing the B to block the A file because
yeah.
by pushing the B pawn it stops that. Um, yeah, I don't know what.
Yeah, and what I'd
I
say
don't know
is
why I
maybe
played
one
that.
time where you want to play A4 before B4 is let's say in this position they play a move like knight E2, and you're worried that when you go B4, they're going to go A4
Yeah,
and keep this all blocked. And this is where if you play A4 first, then this might be a nice idea
yeah,
because
that might have been what I was
now you can play
thinking.
B4,
Yeah,
and if they take, you can open up these files to attack. Maybe not exactly in this way, like
yeah,
the queen is protecting, maybe this is actually holding. You don't want to get a position where suddenly actually they consolidate and they're just 2 pawns up. But yeah, sometimes this is when you play A4
yeah.
before
That
B4.
might have been. There was clearly something I was worried about with playing the B pawn first. Yeah, it
Mm.
must have been. I must have been worried about if I
Yeah.
didn't play A4 now, they'd play A4 and
Yeah, but yeah,
block.
what ended up happening in the game was actually they managed to control this B4 square very well.
Yeah,
I'd even be tempted maybe even play C3 just to stop this completely, but Bishop B4 is probably fine. And yeah, then actually our queenside pawns haven't really succeeded in making progress.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, I don't think I finished having a look at how this game went. So what was the problem in the end? I mean, this to me still all looks relatively
Yeah,
fine.
I think that to be fair, this might be one that's sort of ongoing, or like
Yeah, right,
this
right.
might
This
be
is
another
still an
daily
ongoing
one.
game.
So,
So
but
yeah.
yeah, I think it was more just another highlight of it seemed like recently the kind of other than one where I just made a load of stupid mistakes, like all the
Mm,
like the last 10 or so rapid games, I think I've like won all but one, and they have seemed quite straightforward. Whereas it's the by still sort of carrying on with the daily games, it's like getting, you know, generally they're against like better players because I'm higher rated on that. And it seemed
right,
like
right,
there's been three or four of those recently that have all ended up in this similar, they've all ended up with these kind of issues.
right,
And yeah, it's not necessarily a this cost me the game, but it's a oh, it's happened again, and I wasn't sure what to do at this point.
right, right. But yeah, I think yeah, the biggest take home with these pawns is that um yeah, we don't have to be as afraid of them as you might have been before this lesson, and we must appreciate that yeah, when the pawns come forward, they can be weak
Yeah,
just as much as they can be strong.
yeah. So I
And
think even like in this one, like again, you don't have to comment on it because it's probably ongoing. But I think like where this one's at now is I think I've played like B4. They've gone A takes B4, Queen takes B4, using the fact that pawn's pinned.
mm,
And then I think it's kind of gone down that line of using the fact that their C pawn's pinned to get,
right,
I think, the queens into like B4 attacking and like preparing a sort of yeah, then I think after that, say Queen takes B4, and
uh-huh,
then it's kind of going down that kind of line of trying to get things in on that side. But it was more, yeah, just another. It was the king rather than the queen side where I messed up the move order. I think it was more the king side worry again of going, well, I feel like
right.
I played the opening correctly, but then out of playing the opening correctly, I've kind of ended up with these advanced pawns yet again
Yeah.
and
And
not
as you
really
can see in
sure.
this position, these advanced pawns are nothing but weaknesses.
Yeah,
Like they're doing nothing to
yeah,
really scare you. Um, Yeah, okay, nice. And you know, you saw that one game of mine where I outplayed my opponent. But you know, in this game, um, you know, I still needed my opponent to make mistakes, right? I needed him to play B5. I needed him to,
yeah.
you know, make inaccuracies. But the amazing thing is that when you get to the highest level, so I pulled up this game
Mm.
between Nakamura and Caruana. Unfortunately, you cannot just wait for your opponents to make mistakes because they're not going to because they're Nakamura or Caruana. But here was just an absolutely beautiful example of showing why when the pawns come forward, they can become weak. And yeah, let me hide next moves. Oh God, what have I just done? Why? For some reason, that's hidden the moves for me as well. Okay, that's very odd. Okay, never mind. So, um, yeah, so basically, in this position, just for some context,
Yeah,
Black Pawns
I'll
take knight.
avoid looking at the moves and then yeah,
Yeah, try
pretend
your
they're not
best not
there.
to. I mean, yeah. Um, I more just want to show you the game anyway. So, yeah, they cannot take the knight because we can uh give checkmate. So Caruana played G5, and then Nakamura traded the rooks. Now, just watch how brilliant this is. Like this might seem like at first glance like a very equal position. Both sides have four and two. Both sides have a knight. The kings are on their start squares. Surely this is going to be a draw. But, you know, Nakamura is attacking a pawn. He then attacks another pawn. He then threatens to attack another pawn. And you see these pawns are being dragged forwards.
Yeah.
And all that's happening is that the further down the board they go, the more likely they're going to get weak.
Mm.
And in this position,
Mm.
unfortunately for white, it's not just a simple e4 and win the pawn because concretely there's the move knight c3, and on takes on b4, there's takes on e4. So
Mm.
Hikaru has to get a bit clever with f3, so that now e4 is a threat, and after takes on e3, takes on b4. Again, white cannot just go for knight c2, knight a3 because there's knight c3, knight a2. So Hikaru has to improve his king first, and only once there is absolutely no threats of this knight c3, then we can go for knight c2, kick away the knight, and win the pawn. And then this was just a matter of making sure that these pawns don't become too dangerous. And uh, yeah, I mean, this is all extremely precise play, but now the a pawn starts running, and knight f1 is a beautiful move, basically just allowing these pawns to come forward, but just, making sure that they
Mm.
don't become dangerous. And now there was a threat of pushing e4, e3. So white brought their king back to make sure that this square was completely covered and that this square would be covered. And this was the moment where Caruana resigned. So as we can see, that yeah, Nakamura is absolutely not afraid of
Yeah,
Caruana's pawns coming forward, and in this case, it's extremely evident that the pawns coming forward weakened Black's position.
yeah. I think that's the obviously where this has helped, but I think prior to this lesson, I think that's where even if I'd been able to like calculate that kind of line of chasing
Mm.
the pawns forward, I'd have then probably evaluated that wrongly, or I'd have thought,
Yeah, you start
right, I
getting
can
this
do all of
feeling,
that, but
oh yeah,
all I've really achieved is my pawns are still where they are, and theirs have got
yeah,
4 or 5 ranks closer.
yeah.
But yeah, it's how you then evaluate that as a weakness rather than
Yeah. And
strength.
definitely keep in mind that they could be a strength. Like you're not wrong. Like those pawns are closer to queening, and that does have its element of danger. But yeah, just don't look at it completely one-sided as well, that it's
Yeah,
only a strength, because it's definitely not only a strength, and it's probably as much of a weakness as it is a strength. And I found like actually in my chess, I would very often make unnecessary pawn moves and push my pawns forward. And then suddenly, when I'd get bad positions or these pawns would become exploited, I didn't really understand why. And yeah, it was just a matter of just pushing my pawns too carelessly and not appreciating that they can become weak. So nowadays, when I play chess, when my opponent is pushing pawns forward, I'm like rubbing my hands and licking my lips because I'm thinking, okay, I have a better chance of actually exploiting these pawns. And all I do is just keep the pawns on their start squares. Like I really try and only push pawns when I feel that it's absolutely necessary. Um, and this has helped my chess a lot as a result. But yeah, glad we could cover this in great depth and yeah, thanks for sending these games. So yeah, hopefully that was all very useful.
yes, yeah, yeah, definitely. Like I say, it's well, I think the bit you said around at the end, I like keeping your pawns on the starting squares, and it's almost like that's probably how I've been playing, and it's kind
Right.
of, I guess reassure. It's the more, it's I think it's the both the reassurance to go, yeah, they are just creating a weakness. Don't
Yeah.
overly worry about it. But also,
Yeah.
I think it's that timing thing of like a few of these examples. It's like the weakness is created, and then it's all right. Next move, immediately swing the rook over and target it or do something.
Yes.
Whereas I think that's the bit of if you don't acknowledge it as they've just created a weakness, you then don't go, right, how do I target that? And then if you let
Mm.
them get another move in, they've then supported it and it's no longer a weakness and it's become a
Right.
strength. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that's useful. And yeah, some good general rules and stuff. But yeah, lots of kind of stuff for me to flick back through. So
Hmm.
yeah,
Great.
useful.
Okay. Yeah, nice. I've got a couple more exercises, but I think I'll save them for next time because I've actually got a lesson at 10, so
Okay,
I
no
better
worries.
get around to
Are
that.
they when it says visualization exercise, is
Hmm.
that something I can just do on my own, or is it something that's an
That is
extra?
something you can do on your own. So yeah, actually, yeah, we don't have to save it for next time. But I've hidden the next moves. Let me. Uh, okay, I'll have a think about it. Yeah, maybe I
Yeah,
can. Yeah.
just let me know if it is just a visual, like kind of the kind of thing I can just do on my own, then yeah,
Yeah,
let me know.
then I'll
Nice,
let you
no
know.
worries.
Yeah.
Awesome. Right.
Okay, great.
Thanks a lot. Have a
No
good
worries,
day.
dude. Okay, yeah, and keep up the great rapid chess and all the training.
Awesome. All right.
Okay,
Thanks
cool.
a
See you
lot.
then.
Bye.
Bye.